This video is sponsored by EnviroCleanse. Hey everyone, Michael Alm here. So this week I'm talking about finishes. So I've gone through all the drawers in my shop and I've pulled out all the finishes that I use on a semi to really regular basis. And I'm gonna go through them categorically and talk about when you use them and why, and whether you need this many finishes in your shop or not. The truth is you probably don't. So I know that nobody wants to hear this, but the truth is that the most important part of finishing a project well has nothing to do with the finish that you choose. It has to do with sanding. Yeah. Nobody likes it. Nobody likes it. I do have a tip though to make it a little easier and more tolerable. Whenever I have a moment where I don't know what to do, I can't solve a problem, I don't know how to join a piece to another piece, I'll sit and sand for a little bit. And it clears my head, it gives me a chance to really spend time with the workpiece. And then it doesn't save this huge chunk of sanding to the very end, because a lot of times sanding is half the time that you spend in your project. And so if you break it up into little chunks, it's not nearly as bad. When it comes to what specific grits I use when I sand, I power sand from 120 to 220, and then I hand sand 220 to 320. The 220 is a chance for me to investigate, make sure the power sanding went well, and if there are any swirl marks, I can correct those at that phase. And then the 320 grit is the final polish. The only exception to that is water-based finishes because they raise the grain. So whenever you use a water-based finish, you need to be mindful of that. I never go beyond 220 with water-based finishes until the second coat. Then it's 320 from that point forward. So you've sanded your piece and it's looking really nice. Now you need to decide whether you want to stain it or not. Staining is totally an option, and the reason why people stain furniture pieces is mostly to maintain color over time. Wood has a tendency to change colors when it's exposed to UVs. Some of the most extreme examples are things like Purple Heart and Cherry, where you can set them out in the sun and watch them change. Things like walnut and maple are a little less perceptible, but they do lighten or darken over time. Walnut especially can go pretty blonde. So a lot of times people will add a stain to it to maintain that warmth. If you're working with softwoods, you're going to want to use some sort of pre-stain. The reason for this is that softwoods have really dense sections and really soft sections, and the soft sections absorb the stain in really deeply, and the dense sections, it'll just sit on the surface. So by pre-staining it, you essentially make the surface much more consistent. It's hard to get a good stain on a soft wood, but this is your best shot at doing it. If you watch my video on making wood look like steel, you would have seen me use shellac as a pre-stain. It makes for a really good pre-stain, it seals the wood really well, and it allows just enough absorption for you to still put stain over the surface of it. You just want to use one light coat and sand it back before you apply the stain. So when I say wood stain, this is probably what you're thinking about, and it's super common. It's really easy to find. You can find it at hardware stores, and it's great for making wood look a little bit more antique. So if that's the look that you're going for, there are loads of different colors of this stuff, and I would say go for that. I don't use this very much anymore, and the reason for that is that it has a really long dry time, and I find that it's a little bit hard to work with. I've moved over to water-based stains. So I am not sponsored by General Finishes, but I probably should be because I love their products. They make some of the best finishes and they make some really good water-based stains. And these are pretty much the stains that I go to. If I want to change the color of a piece of wood, I will go with General Finishes. One thing is, if you are used to using these, you should do some practice runs with this stuff because it behaves very differently. It dries a lot quicker and you do have to sand in between coats. But because it dries so quickly, you can pretty much put a top coat on it within the day, as opposed to this stuff, which can sometimes take a week. So the last section on stains that I'm going to talk about, I'm going to call the art materials section. And I've worked in a bunch of museums and frame shops and art galleries over the years. And the people that work there are all artists, so they experiment with stains from art stores. And there's a lot of options out there. The first one I'm going to talk about is India ink, and you've probably heard about this. It's a really good look. It's a really good look, especially for open grained woods, things like oaks and walnuts, because it shows off that grain with nothing else. So it goes completely black. It's sort of a false shosugiban look without the need to burn a piece of furniture. The second of the art finishes is acrylic paint. This is actually an option. This stuff is graphite gray. It's made by Golden. It actually has graphite powder in it. So Once this stuff dries, you can burnish it and make it shine. It's not great for furniture pieces, but it's really good for frames. I framed a lot of pencil drawings with this, and it's an awesome look. You do want to put a top coat over the top of this because it'll just protect that shine once you've got it burnished up properly. It'll probably take a few coats of this as well, and you want to water them down. You don't want to use them straight out of the tube. So the third one I want to talk about is this, and this stuff is the magic. I love this stuff. It is the best wood blackening I have found for walnut, and it's a homemade mixture. So what this is 50% Mars Black oil paint mixed with a medium that's called either Liquid Original or Gilkid. Those are just two different brand names for the same thing. I've got a bottle of Gilkid right here. So this stuff is it's basically a dryer. It dries the paint a lot quicker. You could use just straight oil paint, it would be totally fine, but it would take about a month to dry. Whereas this stuff, it takes like 2 to 3 days. And 2 to 3 days may sound like a long time, but it's really not. This stuff is a one and done top coat. So after you've put this on, that's it. You don't need to add a finish. I wouldn't use this on like a tabletop, but it's pretty much great for everything else. Anything that isn't a work surface, this will be plenty of finish for that wood. Top coats. So these are my go-to. General finishes, once again, they are awesome finishes. So this is kind of synonymous with a wipe-on poly. Wipe-on poly is a brand name, but this stuff is your thinned out polyurethane finish that it self-levels, it's really rich. You want to use this on woods that you're trying to enrich. So darker woods take this really well, things like walnuts and cherries. I use the water-based stuff for anything that I don't want to go yellow. If I've whitewashed stained a piece, or if I'm using like Baltic birch plywood and I don't want it to turn amber, this is the stuff that I go to. It's also dries really fast, which is super nice. You can put like a coat on every 2 hours or so, sometimes less. This stuff, you're gonna wanna wait 24 hours between the coats. So you're probably saying to yourself, if these two work so well, then why do you need all of these? And the truth is, I probably don't. Like, I could probably get rid of all these from my shop and be just fine. These are my go-to. They are super strong. They're really robust. I use them all the time. They're easy to apply, and I can just straight up trust them. So I do love these finishes. I have these for specialty projects. So all these finishes can loosely fit into the category of oils. The reason why I say loosely is that the only true oil that's here is linseed oil. There are true tongue oils and there are true teak oils, but you have to get those from specialty manufacturers. These have been cut with solvents like mineral spirits. There's loads of different reasons why you want to choose linseed oil, and usually it's for people who want to mix their own finishes. They're using it for oil paint medium, or they can even use it as like just a quick way to make the grain pop. It's very yellow, so be aware of that. It can be a beautiful finish when applied correctly, but it takes forever to dry. Tongue oil and teak oil are a little bit quicker to dry. Tongue oil, it comes out more natural looking, and teak oil comes out more orange. Tongue oil is used in indoor applications. Teak oil can be used for outdoor applications. So a lot of times this is applied to outdoor furniture that is made of teak. Waterlocks and Danish oil, they have a lot of additives in them. And Waterlocks is made of a mixture of different oils, resins, and solvents. So it makes it really easy to work with, much faster to dry. It's still slower than a polyurethane to dry, and it's way more toxic smelling. It's supposedly a lot stronger than a polyurethane, but that has not been my experience. I have found that the Armor Seal is just as strong as the Waterlocks. I'll use this on specialty projects, usually when I want a strong finish that'll make the grain pop a lot more than the polyurethane will. So I used it on the Murphy bar build if you saw that video. Danish oil generally is used for furniture restoration or to get that old world hand rubbed look. It comes in a variety of different tones. The medium and the dark just have some stain in them. I tend to gravitate towards just using the natural, but if I'm repairing a piece of furniture that has a chip taken out of it or something like that, a lot of times I'll use the medium or dark to kind of color match it. The main thing with using Danish oil is you want to do a flood coat, and then all the progressive coats after that are super thin, and you want to wipe as much of it off as possible. Otherwise, this will get very sticky. So I also wanted to throw shellac into the mix, not because it's an oil, but because you can use it as an alternative to something like linseed oil. This really brings out the grain in wood without the dry time of oils, and it's really easy to use. It dries super fast. It's not very strong as a surface finish, so if you're gonna have this exposed to any sort of liquids or anything like that, I would go for something like Armor Seal as a top coat, but you can definitely use this as a way to bring out the iridescence in wood. So real quick, I wanted to talk about shop safety, which is very important when you are working with hazardous chemicals. So things like water locks and really spray lacquer. This stuff is really high in VOCs, and you need to wear some sort of protection when you use it. So I like to use a respirator. This is a respirator. This is a dust mask. These are dust filters. These are for chemicals. So make sure when you're using one of these, you've got these on there. The other thing is these don't last forever. And when you store them, you need to store them in plastic. And even after that, once they're opened and activated, they only have a certain shelf life. So make sure you change them often. The other thing you can do is get yourself a shop air filter. And this one is made by EnviroCleanse. They are the sponsor of this week's video. And I love this thing. It is a hospital grade HEPA filter in a really nice compact size. This thing is made for 1,000 square feet, which is like over double the size of this space. So I'm really happy to have this in the shop. I'm happy because the winter's coming and I'm gonna have to put the shop door down at some point. And this will filter out all those harmful chemicals. So thank you, EnviroCleanse. If you are interested in picking up one of their models, which I highly recommend, check out the link down below. There's a discount code for 10% if you enter ALM10 at checkout. All right, we are almost done here. I've got a couple more finishes left to talk about, and then I'm gonna do a rapid fire question and answer session with some questions that I got from my Instagram followers. But first, let's talk about spray finishes. Spray lacquer. I use this fairly often in my shop, and I'll use it when I need to finish something quickly. You can get a lot of coats on in a relatively short period of time, and it's a really strong finish. The downside of it is it has a tendency to look a little bit plasticky, but if you're looking for a super gloss finish, there's nothing better than spray lacquer. Spray polyurethane. I keep this around mostly for job site work. I will spray the backside of a cabinet with it if I don't want it to absorb moisture, things like that. It's usually good for touch-up. I don't often use this on a full furniture piece, but it is super handy to have. Wax. So this is Brie wax. Paste wax. There's a saying, once you use wax, you can't go back. And it's really true. It resists a whole lot of other finishes. So if you plan on refinishing a piece of furniture and it's got wax on the surface, it can be a real pain. You have to sand it way down. A lot of times you can't get it out of the pores of the wood. So wax is a choice that you can't really turn back from. I don't really use this on proper pieces of furniture. The only time I will use a wax is on, in this case, shop furniture. And in this case, beat up old antiques. This looks really good for restoring an old antique where you kind of like the rough edge of it and you want to keep that edge exposed. So you just wipe on some Brie wax. Antique stores use this stuff all the time and it's great stuff. Food safe finishes. So there are some options for food safe finishes, but it's pretty limited. There are some people who say that polyurethane when dried is food safe. I'm not going to take sides on that debate, but there are some here that I know confidently are completely food safe. And interestingly enough, shellac is back. Shellac is actually made by a beetle, the lac beetle, and it's just like little flakes that it produces. So it's sort of like a bee where it makes a hive. These make little flakes, I think, out of tree sap. And those get dissolved into alcohol, and when it's dry, it's completely safe. And a lot of times people use this for kids' toys. It's great for that application, but it's not great for things like cutting boards or spoons or bowls because it does break down with a lot of exposure to water. For that, I like to use mineral oil or mineral oil mixed with beeswax. And this is what I use at home on my countertops. I have butcher block countertops and I use this stuff all the time. It's really handy to have around. It does need to be reapplied fairly often. So another option is salad bowl finish, and this is a lot stronger than any of the other finishes here. One thing that did disconcern me is that it is a petroleum product and it says that it's non-toxic when fully cured. So you can make your own determination on that. I have used it on some spoons and it has held up, but whether it's food safe or not, I'm not really sure. Outdoor finishes. So there's a lot of options out there. I already talked about teak oil. My feeling is that the best outdoor finish for a piece of wood is paint, and then everything else after that is going to require a good bit of maintenance. So even like Thompson's water seal or varnish requires it to be sanded down and refinished every 1 to 2 years. So just be aware of that. Don't use polyurethanes outdoors. Polyurethane is meant for interior situations. Varnish is your outdoor alternative to a polyurethane. All right, so that is pretty much every finish that I have in my shop. And I hope you guys learned something, and I hope that this was helpful. Let me know if you got any extra questions down in the comments down below. And if you have a finish that I don't know about or I didn't mention in here, please talk about it in the comments. That's super helpful. I want to thank you guys for sticking around and watching. I want to thank EnviroCleanse for sponsoring this video, and I'm going to take the last few minutes of the video to answer some questions that I got on Instagram. My throat's a little sore at this point. I've been talking for a while. It's Not Daniel asks, how should you combine finish and paint? Example, part of the project is painted and part natural. That's a very good question. And usually my go-to is water-based polyurethane. It goes really well with paint. It's not gonna give you the rich finish of oil, but adding oil over the top of paint is kind of a bad idea. It tends to go yellow over time and change the color. So I definitely suggest the water-based polyurethane. JT Woodworks asks, does spray lacquer count as cheating? It's just too quick. And yeah, Johnny, you're cheating. Don't use that stuff. Made by Mary Lou asks, what is your recommendation for a wooden sink? If it's actually a sink that's made of wood, I would go with epoxy. That is the only thing that's gonna hold up over time. If you're talking about a wooden countertop around a sink, I would go with wax because you just are constantly reapplying it. A lot of other stuff is gonna break down over time. Common Carve asks, I'm working on a walnut chair with some epoxy accents. What makes the walnut just pop? And the finish that I didn't talk about, which I should have, but I don't have any in my shop, is the Maker brand finish. And that's really good for this application because it's a wax and oil-based finish, and it goes over the top of epoxy really well. My brother asks, is there anything I can't use Brie-Wax for? We'll end on that. My dad loves Brie-Wax. He puts it on everything, and no, Keith, you could put this stuff on anything.